You know what? Can you go back, that young lady that read verse 48, could you go back a little bit to verse 45? Could you read verse 45 through 48?
Okay. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now, when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Then he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now, about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea, and would have passed them by.
What stands out to you about those verses?
I think it's kind of strange that he would have passed them by.
Hmm.
But it's just like the other gospel that we read, when he went up to the mountain to pray. But I thought it was strange that he was going to pass them by.
Maybe he was checking to see how they were doing.
Right, right. That's what I was, yeah. Yeah, you just checking. And that goes back to kind of goes back to why I asked this question, because if you go back, if you go back to verse 46, where we started reading, in verse 46, this is right after, when in verse 45 is where he made them get into the boat immediately, right? It says, made them get into the boat so they can sail across from Bethsaida, go across the Sea of Galilee. And then he sent the people away. And then after that, it goes on to say, after he sent the people away and he sent the disciples onto the boat, it says he went into the mountains to pray. But then it goes on and says in verse 47, in the evening, while the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land, he saw them. So I don't know about you guys, but that stood out to me, because it says that even as Jesus went back after he departed, after he left the crowds and he left them at the shore, and he went up into the mountains to pray, but he never took his eyes off of them, because he was looking at them from the mountains. He was looking at them in the lake, in the boat from the mountains. So his eyes were never off of them, because he was seeing their progress as they were going through as they were crossing the lake in the storm. Because it says there that he saw them. He saw them having difficulty rowing with the winds against them, right? And just before that, in verse 47, it says that he was in the mountains. So he was still his eyes were still on them, even though he left them, he was still looking at them. So that stood out to me. That stood out to me, that Jesus, he's always watching over us, even if he's not, even if we don't feel as though he's watching over us, he's always watching over us. And that's why we have to have faith, right? Sometimes we may feel as though we're going through storms alone, but we have to know that we're not. Jesus is always watching. He's always seeing. Just like he saw those disciples, he saw them going through that storm. And as that young lady said, he walked out on the water to check and see how they were doing. Right? Because Jesus is always concerned about us. He's always concerned about his children, and he cares about how we are doing. And but he wants us to keep trusting and having faith in him, and knowing that his eyes are always on us. I'll never forget. There's some of you may remember this. There's some research that was done. They did some research to see how babies are neglected, and they did these experiments with these babies where they put them in a room, and the parents left the room, and they looked at the reaction from different babies, and they saw that some babies, they had no reaction because they were always left alone. They just didn't have any reaction. They're left alone all the time. And then there was some babies that their parents left, and they got a little nervous at first, but once they heard the voice, well, the parents could be in a different room, and they know they'll be okay, because they know that their parents will come back, right? They know their parents will come back. But then some of the babies, they had no reaction at all, because they never knew when their parents would come back, because they were left alone so long all the time. So they had done these experiments, and I kind of thought about that. It reminds me of how Jesus wants us to respond when, just like when he left the disciples to go across the lake into that storm alone, he wanted them to continue to trust him and to know that he was right there, even though he may not have been there physically with them. But they should have known that everything was going to be all right, because Jesus, his eyes was always on them. So this is John chapter 6, verse 19 here. It says, so when they had rowed about 3 to 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. So Jesus is walking out on the water towards the boat, and the disciples are afraid. Why do you think they were afraid? Please check out the rest of this podcast by clicking on the link that appears on your screen. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel to stay updated for more videos.